so much for putting that into context because I've had the opportunity to sing both in Catholic masses because I'm Catholic and I cancer at a Catholic church now, but I've also sang as a gigging musician in Protestant churches, and I have to tell you, I have sang a lot more Bach in Catholic masses and a lot more Byrd in Protestant services. So having this context from you kind of makes things fall into place.
Yeah, and we don't think, our modern society, kind of American Christianity is a big salad bar. So, we can take in little pieces and bits and pieces. And so Bach in the Catholic service and William Byrd or whatnot in the Anglican service, nobody thinks about it anymore. But at the time, it would have been scandalous to have a Catholic composer in Latin writing stuff for a Lutheran church or vice versa. And to take those conflicts then and then put them into today's society where we don't think anything of it, kind of only contributes to the fascination.
They're just old dead guys. I mean, to think about them like these political beings is so interesting. So,
Mhm.
what would you say makes this chamber choir music from this era different from the large scale choral works that more audiences might be familiar with?
Well, the large scale works are kind of park and bark, and that's how they were designed. You put a whole bunch of people on stage and you put a whole bunch of people in the audience, and everybody in the audience sits down and shuts up and in the dark and stays there for an hour, and the people on stage do their thing. But that's not how this music was designed. It was designed in situ during religious services. So, William Byrd's Ave Verum Corpus, for example, that is something that would have been performed at a very specific time in a Catholic Mass during the season of Lent, leading up to Easter. And apart from that singular time, you couldn't perform that text. It would have been completely forbidden outside of the liturgy. So that piece of music is designed for a very specific instance on a very specific day in a very specific week in a very specific year, because it's a 3-year cycle liturgical calendar. We can extract that and perform it anytime now, and it's fine. But to be able to take these pieces that were designed in situ and then offer them to an audience outside of the liturgical context really broadens how people can interpret what the music that they're hearing. Whether or not they're actually reading the translations and thinking about how the music was designed and how it was intended. Well, most people aren't reading the translations in real time in their program. So we can take it on a secondary note where we're listening to the chord structures, we're listening to the harmony, and we can use that to guide it as a purely subjective beautification experience. We're just listening, we're looking at a piece of art because we like to look at it, not necessarily realizing why that piece of art was painted or the purpose for which it was painted in the first place. And to be able to do that, I think is really neat, because it's not, this music wasn't designed for the park and bark style, but
Mhm.
that's the way that we are presenting it here. And presenting it here, that means that the audience is going to perceive it much differently than it was intended. And I think that can always lead to better outcomes when you allow the audience to decide how they feel about the music, as opposed to offering it in a specific context where you force the audience to perceive it in that context.
That's really interesting. And it leads me to my next question because, talking about the Bird Ave Verum, which is one of my favorites, there's a certain level of intimacy with this kind of music. So can you talk a little bit about how that intimacy of the repertoire changes the experience for both the singers and the listeners?
Yeah, so again, removing it from the liturgical context, the singers generally are going to have a fairly detailed knowledge of the text, what the individual words mean, and then they can follow along with how the individual words and phrases fit into how the composer was setting them. So they're playing a lot of inside baseball with the music that the audience may not hear. And that's really great. But it goes further than that because the the intimacy that we can feel in music is occurs apart from the actual music itself. You don't necessarily need to have any musical experience or knowledge whatsoever to be able to have affect wash over you as a result. Hearing a piece of music for the first time, having no idea why it was created, can still affect you emotionally, as can seeing a piece of art for which you have absolutely no background knowledge. It can still be quite an emotional experience. And then what we decide is art is again subjective in and of itself. And so I don't think it's our job to say, to tell the audience that this is intimate and you should feel
Yeah,
that it's intimate, right? It's our job as performers to present the piece of art and then allow the audience to perceive it however it is that they perceive it in that moment, and
that's a
not
great philosophy.
try and get in the way of that perception. Just put the piece of art up in a gallery and let people look at it.